The trick about the capitalist scene is that it suggests to people that everybody benefits, right? The idea of capitalism is a rising tide will lift all boats. That's a common saying in the United States. The idea is that if the rich are better, everybody's doing better. But that's not really true. I mean, there's a sort of apartheid built into capitalism that cannot really openly be discussed. And of course, this is where people get really nervous when you point this out, right? When you point out relationships of exploitation, when you point out the fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer.
Dynamic biblical discussions with special guests exploring tough biblical issues, academic scholarship, ethics, archaeology, textual criticism, Old Testament, New Testament, Bible interpretation, apocalyptic literature, Christian history, ancient Near East cultures. You're tuned in to Conversations with Pastor Cliff on Puluso Ministries.
Good day, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. Today we have a wonderful guest. His name is Dr. Joerg Rieger. Welcome, Dr. to Puluso Ministries.
Thank you, Cliff. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. I know you have, written a wonderful book, Theology in the Capitalist Scene, which I have, immersed myself in it, and our conversation is going to be centered around that because I know your work is pretty much around theology, economics, and labor. So we're going to be talking about that in this conversation. But before we dive right into it, could you perhaps familiarize our audience with who you are and what has inspired you to get into the work that you are doing?
So I'm foremost a theologian, right? People always say I deal with economics and politics, which is true, but I do so as a theologian. So for me, theology is important because these are ultimately matters of ultimate concern, if you want to put it this way. I'm a professor of theology at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And for me, what really matters in the world are the things that shape us all the way to the core. And so, for people of faith, of course, they would say God shapes us all the way to the core. The Christian faith shapes us all the way to the core. But unfortunately, there are other things that also shape us. And so here we have to talk about the economy. We have to talk about politics, not necessarily because we like it, but because these things shape us. And we want to make a difference.
Uh-huh. That's actually interesting. As a theologian, I know there's this concept that you talk about in your book, which you call capitalist scene, and you make a distinction between it and Anthropocene. So could you perhaps, give us a little bit of distinction, how you make this distinction, and flesh it out for our audience, what the difference is between the two terms that you use based on the framework that you have adopted in terms of our current crisis that we are facing.
So I'm assuming a lot of people will have heard about the Anthropocene, but probably not about this Capitalocene term. So let me explain. If you think back, school, they taught you about all these geological ages. The most recent one, the Holocene, goes back 11,000 years since the Ice Age. This is sort of a geological age, age of the planet Earth. And a lot of people are arguing these ages are always shifting, and the new age, the new age that we find ourselves in now, is what some people say the Anthropocene. That means this is the time when human beings are shaping the future of the Earth, the future of planet Earth. And what we're seeing here, of course, is there 8 billion moving to 9 billion human beings that definitely make an impact. And of course, a lot of people that talk about the Anthropocene are worried about the damage that human beings are doing to the globe. That's debatable. And those of us who talk about the Capitalocene are saying the real damage that's done to the globe is maybe not the number of human beings that live on it, but other forces that shape it much more deeply. So the Capitalocene is a way of talking about money, the power of capital shaping the planet all the way to its core. So the problem then becomes ecological destruction is not just a matter of a lot of people. but it is a matter of the dominant interests. So, for instance, people are worried about global warming today. That's a real problem, right? There's scientific evidence. More than 97% of scientists are saying, there's global warming, human-made global warming. Um, if you study the Capitolocene, you will realize that the CO2 emissions, which are at the basis of a lot of this global warming, are actually produced, 71% of them are produced by the interests of 100 corporations. So if you're worried about global warming CO2 emissions, it's not enough just to blame human beings for that. One has to realize where this is coming from, right? 71% of CO2 emissions are produced by the interests of big business. That's one thing. The other thing about the Capitalocene, and this is why I talk about it as a theologian, is that what we're realizing is these things are not just shaping the planet, they're not just shaping politics. Well, that you can see today also. If you look at the United States, big money is shaping politics, to be sure, but it's also shaping us all the way to the core. So I'm concerned about how this Capitalocene matter shapes faith, our images of God, our personal beliefs, our relationships, our faith communities, and so on. So, this is why some of us are talking about the Capitalocene, because we want to see what is moving us, what's moving the world today. And then the real question is, what do we do about it? How can we engage that?
Uh-huh. So your work, Dr. Rieger, confronts and emphasizes the need for theology to confront, these systems of power. And how does your work then redefine the role of theology in addressing economic and environmental injustice?
So the first thing is always to understand what's going on, right? So if you think about this capitalocene term one more time, if we understand that nothing is really independent, nothing really ever fell from the sky. The way we think, the way we talk, our faith is always shaped. The first step really is to understand how even faith is shaped by the dominant flows of power. One of my earlier books was titled Christ and Empire. And in that book, I show for a period of 2,000 years of Christianity how dominant powers have always shaped our images of Christ. That's just the way it happens. This is not moralizing. This is not to say, oh my God, the sky's falling. It's just realizing what's going on. Because my argument is, unless you realize what's going on, you cannot really make a difference. Now, once you've seen that, once you've seen what is going on, how, say, dominant images of God are shaped in the Capitalocene, so that people really look at God very much in terms of powerful individuals, CEOs, certain American presidents have this godlike aura. They claim it, right? Then we can say what's the alternative? And the beauty of it is, and this is what I also show in my Christ and Empire book, for 2,000 years there has always been alternatives. There has always been resistance. And that's where we have to start looking again. So this is not me dreaming up something. This is simply me saying where are the spaces in today's world where people have not fallen down, or where people have not knelt down and worshipped the golden calf. Um, and the beauty is we see these alternatives. We see spaces. There's faith communities. There's social movements. This is part of the work that we're trying to do at Vanderbilt, where I'm directing the Wendling Cook program in religion and justice. This is one of my projects here. People want to check it out. Our website is religionandjustice.org. Just one word, religionandjustice.org. And we're investigating how theology shapes up differently, how faith can be formed differently. And we're actually encouraged that there are good things happening.
Uh-huh. You in your work, I know in the Wendler program, which I'm a part of, um, I've quite have gained a lot from it. And you have this theme that runs across your work. You show this interconnectedness against the struggle against capitalism. You talk about class, you talk about racism, the connection also with the environment destruction. So, how can theologians and activists better articulate and act to show this interconnectedness that you talk about in your work?
So one of the projects that we're doing at the Wendell and Cook program, and you're actually part of a group like that, Cliff, yourself, we call it Solidarity Circles. And in it, we put faith communities and examples of the solidarity economy together, which then means, each faith community has a project where it engages the economy constructively and critically. And we think of this as a two-way street. So, if the capitalist scene, the interests of big business shape faith, oftentimes unconsciously, uh, the antidote would be to connect faith to alternative ways of doing business, right? So, if you think about a worker cooperative, where workers are the ones who are actually, calling the shots, making the decisions, the ones that are accruing the profit, that is a very different world. All of a sudden, you have a whole different relationship with your fellow. Workers, the people in your community, and that feeds back into the faith community. And of course, then the faith community can reclaim its traditions, go back to reading the Bible again, go back to reading its religious traditions again in this new light. And they might realize that God ultimately is not so much a CEO, but much more, someone who works in community, somebody who actually cares, somebody who is interested in justice, the flourishing of life, healthy relationships, and so on. That's a big difference. So in this way, solidarity circles are really helping to transform faith communities from the inside out, as it were, and that has implications then for everything. Think about the racism issue that you just mentioned. A lot of people look at racism, especially in the United States, as a separate issue, but that too is connected, right? The capitalist scene is built on racism. Big money is built on divide and conquer, right? Dividing white people and black people from each other. And so, as you build different relationships, as you build communities, as you build alternative economies, you can then fight racism differently and at levels that we're not oftentimes getting to. So in the U.S., for instance, there's a lot of protest about racism, as there should be. That's a good thing, right? I'm not saying that's wrong. But what's much less clear is that we can actually fight racism by empowering communities, by empowering, say, black communities to take things into their own hands, building some power, building some economic democracy, as we're saying, and thereby feeding back into political democracy, feeding back into religious democracy. Those are really exciting things because what we're seeing, and this is not just a guess, we're really seeing things changing and communities getting empowered in ways that are pretty impressive. And as a theologian, I would say in ways that ultimately really help us understand God and our faith better.
Uh-huh. I see. Would I be correct, Dr. Rieger, to say that the cooperatives that you talk about, would they be alternative economies that communities could engage in terms of coming together and doing something that is great for that particular community to actually thrive?
Yes, and this is the reason why economics and labor are ultimately important for theology, because dominant economics in the capitalist scene, labor in the capitalist scene, is built on the back of working people. People that study the economy, business schools. The basic idea is. Business is about the production of profit, and profit ultimately accrues to the shareholders, right? This is the principle of capitalism. Profit accrues to the owners. And if you change that relationship at work, where profit then not always just trickles up, but actually accrues to the community, gets shared, is something that helps the flourishing of life, not just for people, but even for non-human environments. That's a substantial shift. And if you think about that shift, then being brought back into faith communities, that's a revitalization. I would say, maybe using a big term here, even a sort of, how do I say it, awakening, right? A sort of awakening that we haven't seen in a long time. You know, we sometimes we're just happy when people have a little nice faith experience. We're looking for awakenings. This is a much bigger thing.
Mhm. I know. I mean, I live in post-apartheid South Africa, but I've lived in a South Africa prior to the abolition of apartheid. And you critique this global economic system in how it plays its role in perpetuating this inequality. So how do you see perhaps something like a legacy of apartheid intersecting with the capitalist scene, particularly in the context of South Africa, in terms of economic inequality and environmental uh, degradation, that as you would say.
The trick about the capitalist scene is that it suggests to people that everybody benefits, right? The idea of capitalism is a rising tide will lift all boats. That's a common saying in the United States. The idea is that if the rich are better, everybody's doing better. But that's not really true. I mean, there's a sort of apartheid built into capitalism that cannot really openly be discussed. And of course, this is where people get really nervous when you point this out, right? When you point out relationships of exploitation, when you point out the fact that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Now, if you apply this to South Africa, the end of apartheid in the 90s was really a fascinating development. Nobody thought this could happen, and yet it did happen. It made a huge difference. I mean, I remember President Mandela saying, we welcome a non racist, non sexist South Africa. And to be sure, South Africa has made some progress. But what President Mandela did not say is we welcome a post capitalist South Africa. And so a lot of the problems that continue, I think, have to do with the fact that there's this hidden apartheid in capitalism that doesn't ever get addressed. And so the assumption is we're now beyond racism, now we're beyond sexism. Of course, in the United States, this happened a little earlier, with the Civil Rights Acts, the Voting Rights Acts, and so on in the 60s. And yet, racism persists, right? Sexism persists. And people say, how is that possible? Well, again, this is where the capitalocene theory is helpful because it really helps you understand how these structures are played by the people at the very top to divide us, to conquer us, and basically to stay in power at the expense of the majorities.
Mhm. And Dr. Rieger, you make a quite a fascinating connection. But now, what I'm concerned about is, in South Africa, we have this history of liberation theology, which was pretty much borrowed from what was happening in the U.S. In the 70s, taking from the works of Dr. King specifically. Dr. King and ultimately James Cohen kind of systematized that work, and we see the struggle against apartheid that ultimately was abolished, and you use this word post apartheid in your work, and how much your theological framework resonate with the challenges that are still ongoing with justice in South Africa pertaining to poverty and this wealth. I mean, I think you mentioned it in your book that we always talk about this war on poverty, but we actually never talk about this war on wealth.
Yeah, that's of course a bit tongue in cheek, right? I mean, what does war on wealth mean? Well, it really means the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and this is something you can see really well in the United States. I oftentimes talk about the United States because it's such a good example, and of course, I know this is happening in South Africa. It's even happening in Europe. A lot of people don't realize that Europe is also getting more and more unequal, and the concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands is a problem there as well. So the question here really is, what are we facing, right? Where is this going? Um, And where's it going to end? I mean, right now in the U.S., it looks like things are getting worse and worse and worse. Right? We now have the world's richest man in the White House, basically making all kinds of decisions. Reshaping government and all of this, even though he wasn't even elected. Um, and if you then tie this back to some of the other struggles, you think about, say, in the United States, you have the civil rights struggle. You mentioned Dr. King, James Cone. A lot of this comes out of the civil rights struggle. But what is oftentimes not realized is that the civil rights struggle always has to go hand in hand with an economic rights struggle, because if it doesn't, civil rights in the end can easily be subverted, turned around, turned on their heads, which is what we're seeing right now. And I think that was clear to Dr. King in a way that a lot of people forgot now. Um, in Cohn's case, I think this is one of the shortcomings of Cohn's work, that it focuses so much on the race issue that class issues, economic issues, and so on, always take a backseat. Not to say that Cohn didn't work on that. He had certain periods in his work where he did. But in the end, these seem to be separate issues. And what we're saying here is they're not separate issues. So the point here is not, is class or race more important? The real question is, how are these things coming together, and how is racism actually based on a class struggle, and how is class struggle using racism in order to keep the rich, make the rich richer and the poor poorer?
Yeah, I think it connects to my next question. Looking at South Africa, we know that it's heavily reliant on this extractive industry, like mining, which is significant for the South African economy, and also we have this environmental devastation that actually takes place when these minerals and resources are actually extracted from what you would term as non-human production in your book. And how do we then address these the social costs that come with that, particularly to the environment that keeps producing this endless pit that the capital system keeps on drawing from, but never takes care of anything they extract from the environment, and the people who actually do all the labor extracting these minerals, actually they have little to show to what they have been doing for over the years. And some of the mines have closed down, but the people there are left impoverished, years on after these corporations have gone on.
So extraction is a real problem. I mean, people need to realize that, right? This is not just a matter of pulling resources from the earth, but it is extremely damaging, because, say the extraction of fossil fuels then is pulling fossil fuels from the earth. And at the same time, of course, damaging the climate in ways that cannot be repaired. Extraction here in the United States, we have examples of what's called mountaintop removal. It's basically tearing down mountains to get to the raw materials inside them, and destroying, reshaping whole regions in ways. Of course, you have some tremendous projects there in South Africa also. But what is important is to keep together the problem of extraction and exploitation. This is going back to the capitalist scene. At the heart of this is the building of wealth for the few on the backs of the many. And with exploitation, we can say it's built on the backs of the labor of people. With extraction, we can say it's built on the backs of everything else, right? And of course, keep in mind the natural environment that is being extracted here is also productive, is also laboring, right? So in a way, it's extracting and exploiting together in such a way that damage is done. And again, not only a matter of wealth, the rich are getting richer, but also a matter of power. Power is now concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. So that's the analysis. And of course, with the with the environment, then what people are talking about is externalities. Business people basically think what they get from the earth is free. It doesn't even have to show up on the books, and this is true for labor too. Wages and benefits are pushed down more and more so as to reduce the costs of human and other than human labor. So that's the problem. The solution here, and this is where I think the real hope lies, is to say that the work that is done by the majority of humanity and by the majority of the non-human environment, while it gets exploited and extracted, also has some potential for resistance. You can never extract and exploit everything altogether 100%. So there's always a surplus that comes back to the people, that comes back to the environment. And what we're suggesting is this is where the alternatives get built. So then we're saying, use your labor, use your own labor, organize your labor, organize the people. In the pandemic, we called them essential workers whose work is essential in such a way that they build alternatives. And this is, of course, what capitalism doesn't like at all, right? They don't mind a protest here and there. They don't mind an action here and there, perhaps a critical theologian saying something. Who cares? Uh, but when working people come together and organize and thereby address the problem of exploitation, when people come together and realize what is being extracted here from non-human nature also is powerful and can be used for the resistance. That's powerful. I mean, this is something where I think not only the resistance is located, but the production of alternatives.
Uh-huh. You make a connection with power in your book. So a lot of people kind of conflate power and privilege, and a lot of you know people from maybe a white background would I think they have privilege. It's quite normal for them to think like that, but and think they have power. But you realize that many of them don't have that power. And how do we then subvert that? Where we have these diverse minorities coming together that are exploited around the globe, which are part of the 99% against the 1% that is gaining all the the wealth that the 99% is actually building for them. How do we then distinguish between this dynamic between power and privilege in the capital scene?
So, first of all, let me say that power is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people that see dominant power doing a lot of destructive things, extracting, exploiting, might think, well, we should divest ourselves from power. I hear this in liberal theological circles a lot. We should divest ourselves from power. Well, there's a problem with dominant power, but there's also some potential for alternative power to be built. So this is where we're heading. Let me just clarify this. We want to build some power that's different from the dominant power, that's life-giving, rather than sucking the lives out of people and out of the environment. Now, in order to get there, people need to realize where they have power and where they don't. And I think this is one of the confusions of privilege and power, that privileged people are led to believe that their privilege gives them plenty of power. Let me give you an example from the United States, because I don't want to presume too much about other countries. But what I see here, for instance, with white supremacy in the U.S. is supposed to make white people believe that they're supreme, right? Of course, this is true for nationalism. My background is German. German nationalism was supposed to make German people believe that they're supreme. Uh, that's, of course, not the way the game is played, right? If you think about white supremacy in the United States, it really is for the white elites. White elites ultimately, that have all the wealth and most of the power, are the ones that want to suggest to white people, you have more in common with us than with other people. But if you think about the black warehouse worker, perhaps, or the black grocery store worker and the white grocery store worker, in the end, they have more in common with each other than they have, with their white bosses. So white people here realizing that they may have more in common with black people, non-white people. Men realizing that they have more in common with women than with their male bosses, their white bosses, that's a huge win because it helps people realize that privilege oftentimes is used to mislead people to say, well, you have some white privilege. That is true. um, I have a lot of privilege. I do have white privilege. I have male privilege. I have, university professor privilege and all of this. But the system wants to confuse me to think that my privilege translates into power. And that doesn't really work that way. I can say things, but the system doesn't care. I can protest, the system will continue. uh, I can think I can change the world, and ultimately I cannot. So people with privilege, so white people with privilege here, to use the example of white supremacy, if they begin to realize that white privilege only gets you so far, it gets you something. Privilege is real. Privilege can be a problem, very clearly. I'm saying that. But to realize that it does not give you the power to transform the world, it doesn't even give you the power to live a very happy and flourishing life. I mean, sometimes you're struggling to make ends meet because privilege doesn't even buy you lunch, in many cases. If you think about it this way, you turn it around and you say, okay, what have we got? This is where the solidarity thing comes in. I think this is what you were alluding to. Now I realize, even as a university professor, I may have more, I do have more in common with the warehouse workers, um, white and black, than I have even with the president of my university, let alone the billionaire donors that keep the shop running.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, pulusoministries.co.za.
And tell me, Dr. Rieger, we know that in the U.S., Christian nationalism is quite a challenge that is posing to the nation, as we see in the news currently, and it often aligns itself with capitalism and capitalist ideologies. And how does your theological framework critique that entanglement of Christianity with a capitalistic system, particularly with American politics?
So, take this back to what I was just saying about white supremacy. White supremacy ultimately is producing a false identity to suggest to all white people that they have more in common with the white bosses than with their non-white fellow workers, right? And that's, of course, a trap. So white supremacy, in a way, does something for white people. It makes them feel better, right? It gives them some privilege. But in the end, I call this unite and conquer. It is uniting white people in order to conquer all non-white people. Well, that's clear. But it's also uniting white people, white supremacies, uniting white people in order to conquer most white people, because it confuses them about their real interests. It confuses them about their real power. Religion functions in a very, or can function, doesn't always have to, but it can function in a very similar way. It produces false identity. So this Christian nationalism is a conglomeration of nationalism and Christianity that now suggests to Christian nationalists that they have more in common with the Christian nationalists at the top than with the rest of humanity. So in the United States now, your typical Christian nationalist will feel very closely connected to President Trump, and Elon Musk and all of this, who ultimately don't really care about Christianity, but who care about keeping their power, expanding their power, building their power. And thereby Christian nationalism becomes a trap that confuses people about their real solidarities, their real interests. In other words, Christianity then turns into its opposite. If Jesus says, he cares about the least of these, the last shall be the first, and the first shall be the last, all these things. Um, all of a sudden, Christian nationalism basically says, whoever is at the top is my leader and I have to follow them. Whoever is at the top has my best interest in mind, and I believe that. Of course, none of this is true, right? We see the fallout already, and I predict we'll be seeing a lot more of the fallout in the months and years to come, because this system that's supposedly good for Christian nationalists, white people, and so on, is going to collapse. It's not sustainable. It only works for the top. It never works for the masses. The same is true, by the way, for the gospel of prosperity, right? It usually makes the ones on top more prosperous and not the masses. So the problem then is, um, that it's actually a ruse. It's a game that's being played in order to confuse people, and it's not even helping the ones that believe it's actually built for them.
I get that, and it's quite fascinating that a lot of people fall into this trap, into this unite and conquer, and actually vote for their against their own interests. I mean, we see it play out, particularly now in the U.S., where people were coming to vote for something else under the banner of whiteness, but many of them have realized that they actually lost just as much as the other minority groups are actually losing around, particularly the U.S. Citizenship.
So this voting against their own interests. I mean, a lot of people notice this, and there's a lot of head scratching. Why is it that people are voting against their own interests? It is precisely because of this is a term I have coined: unite and conquer methods, right? Because people are united along the lines of false solidarity. Whiteness ultimately is a false solidarity that doesn't even pay off for most white people. Um, Nationalism is a false solidarity that does not pay off for most of the nationalists. We've seen this, by the way, in Germany. I mean, one of my grandfathers was a soldier in Hitler's army, right? Sent out against the Russians. Um, German nationalism that was supposed to make him superior didn't really do a whole lot for him. I mean, in a way, it made him sick. It ruined his life in all kinds of ways, and he didn't care. I mean, it wasn't the sort of thing that he was told it was. So we have these false solidarities that get built, and then Christianity becomes another problem. It gets now used to build another false solidarity where supposedly this is about Christians versus people of other faiths, Christians versus Muslims or Christians versus atheists. What it's covering up is that the problem of Christianity is actually Christianity itself. Um, I worked this out in a book, Jesus versus Caesar, subtitled For People Tired of Serving the Wrong God, because the problem here is bad Christianity that's really challenging good Christianity, and that is usually not addressed. I mean, in the U.S. in the elections, is if you're Christian, you have to vote for Trump. Well, that's bad Christianity. I mean, that's false Christianity. That's heresy. Of course, I could give you a long argument for why that is so. I'm not saying that lightly. But it's those kinds of questions that we have to deal with if we want to liberate ourselves from what is happening today.
I seem to be getting that you have this fabric of interconnectedness, particularly with the global struggle under capitalism. So how can this global South communities such as South Africa and build this solidarity with marginalized groups around the global North as well to come to counter this exploitative system in the capitalist scene?
The main thing about interconnectedness, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, is to realize that we're always already connected. In other words, individualism tells us, oh, we're all separate. uh, your business is your business, my business is my business, and there is no connection. And then the communitarians come and say, oh no, we have to become more communitarian, we have to be more connected, we have to build relationships. The first thing to realize is there are already relationships in place. Except that these relationships, of course, are not always very happy relationships, right? They're relationships of being exploited together, their relationships of being welded together by the capitalist scene in this struggle to make ends meet, in this struggle for survival. The Apostle Paul knew this in his image of the church as the body of Christ, 1 Corinthians 12, when he says, for instance, if one member suffers, all suffer together with it. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you. The head cannot say to the feet, I have no need of you. So realizing the first thing here that we're already connected, that they're essential workers around the world who have more in common with each other than with anybody else. This is of course not the way the story is told to us, but the truth is there's an international solidarity which exists whether people realize it or not. The challenge then, of course, is how do we build on that foundation? So the question is not just let's talk a lot about solidarity, but now let's build it. Let's build community. Let's communicate. And I think this podcast, this conversation that we're having today is one example. I mean, we're building community between North and South, realizing that the worker in South Africa may have more in common with the worker in Nashville, Tennessee, than with the South African boss or the American boss. And this is not to be mean to the bosses. I mean, the bosses know this already. They're all closely connected. They're jetting around the globe, meeting, at the big hotels and hanging out at their vacation spots. So why can't the 99% build more of these relationships? That's of course the basic question, and then one has to think about specific projects. What could be some of these projects? For me, this is where, of course, faith communities are important on the one hand, but also worker-driven initiatives, so worker cooperatives, globally connected, really help us understand how we're in so many ways struggling for the same things. And thereby we're building some power, but we're also building some energy. That's the other beautiful thing here is we don't have to do it all just moralistically. We get energized by being in relationship.
Uh-huh. That's fascinating because something that jumps at me as I'm talking to you now. I've been observing that currently in the US you have this labor movements that have kind of gotten a bit of a renewed energy in recent years, and they are unionizing, they're striking and protesting all over the show and across all different industries. So how does your critique, of these worker struggles, how does that, feed off or feed in into their dignity and rights as workers around the U.S. and around the globe?
So what we're seeing here is there's a lot of it that's already bubbling up from the ground, as it were, right? If you want to caricaturize top-down power as the power of the capitalist scene, there's bottom-up power forming everywhere. And to me, what's most amazing is this is happening even in places where you least expect it. So Tennessee in the United States is one of the southern states where unions are not strong, where labor is not something that you can even openly discuss in most churches. Yet there's some upsurge in the labor movement. There are young people that are ultimately understanding that this is in their own interests. And what we're doing from the Wendling Cook program at Vanderbilt is we're working with faith communities on these issues. So putting religion and labor together. We're having a religion and labor summer school this summer for a week where we're training young theologians and seminary students in how these things reshape each other mutually. We're working closely together with the Southeast Center of Cooperative Development, which is doing worker co-op development work. And we're doing that always from a faith perspective. So these are not just economic and political projects. These are really projects that help revitalize people of faith. And of course, if you want to know how powerful this is, you always have to look at the pushback. One of the first things that the Trump administration has been trying to do is, change and reappoint all the members of the National Labor Relations Board NLRB. Change, challenge, the right of workers to organize, do anything and everything it can to prevent workers from building solidarity and power together. This is also what's behind firing all of these government employees. It's not just that we want to cut money, it's also that you want to cut worker power because a lot of these government employees are organized union members. There's a lot greater union density in these government jobs than in many other jobs. So this is enemy number one for that reason. In other words, just ask yourself, why is the capitalist scene so worried about working people organizing? Well, it is because it is afraid that it might lose some power. It is afraid that the world might actually be different if working people had some power. And of course, this is not just about money and benefits. This is about having a voice. This is about really having human dignity, counting as a human being. Uh, I mean, we're proud of our economic democracy. Sorry, we're proud of our political democracy. Why can't we build some economic democracy to go along with it?
Mhm. And tell me, Dr. Rieger, why do people not realize that, collectively in their diversity, they have the tremendous power that the 1%, don't want them to actually, organize and utilize that power that they have, which you talk about it in your book, that it's this constant resistance that gives members who belong in the community a bit of hope. So why is that, people not tapping into that power that they have, or maybe they don't think they have so much power collectively?
I think deep down people realize it. I mean, children realize it. They relate differently. This whole individualism problem, where I say individualism is really the lie of the powerful, is really something that has to be suggested to people. So part of the problem is education. People get miseducated in such a way that they don't realize they have power. They might sense they have some power, but then education, whether you go to business school or to theology school, uh, doesn't really want you to realize that. I mean, take the question of labor. This is the place where I'm arguing people have the most power, because no boss could ever say only a dead worker is a good worker. They have said this about many human beings, as you know, in history, but workers actually have some power at work. Now, you look at theological education and you tell me, when's the last time that anybody in theological education or in the church has actually taken labor seriously? Where's the issue coming up? Not just as a matter of ethics and morals, but as a matter of uh, you know, deep theology, realizing, as Jesus says, "My Father is working," the Gospel of John, and I'm working too, right? So that there are these places, and I mean, working people in the U.S. realize, Amazon warehouse workers realize it, Starbucks baristas, in the coffee shops realize it, and once they start organizing, as a lot of younger people do, I mean, they get the sense that there's some real power. These things get utterly destroyed. I mean, we had graduate students organizing at Vanderbilt recently. Their efforts get pushed aside with all this state of the art methods. We call it union busting. And so people experience that too, right? People who are awakening to this possibility, starting to organize, then very quickly get disillusioned because the system, the repercussions, the pushback is so harsh.
Uh-huh. I mean, I'm thinking about what I'm seeing happen here in South Africa, where there is the move or migration, where the racist apartheid kind of put a lot of Afrikaner people into a particular different class of people, and currently a lot of struggle, as you mentioned earlier, that people will focus solely on racism and not be able to do a proper class analysis, where typically the 1% would hide themselves under that one, that banner 1%. So, what is the importance of us understanding how to actually critique class in relation also to race, so that we can know exactly what we're dealing with, so that we kind of prepared to take on the real challenges that are confronting us in this capitalistic system?
Class analysis is tricky. I mean, the reason why not much of it is happening is I think people don't quite know what to do with it. And that's understandable. Again, this is education. If you have an American education, I mean, even if you have a German or European education, you really don't learn much about class. And then class, of course, gets usually portrayed as matter of status. Then you talk about class as layers, strata in a society. You have the middle class, the upper middle class, the lower middle class. But what we're saying, and this is part of my theology in the Capital Scene book, where we're doing class analysis, class is not a matter of layers. It's a matter of relationships of power. And that gets tricky because people don't really want to talk about these relationships of power. Sometimes people worry that when you talk about this, you're now demonizing people, you're moralizing, you're somehow making people look bad. But that is not the point of class analysis. The point of class analysis simply is to look at the system, to ask the question, where do you find yourself? And how can you change things, right? So, for working people, for instance, you're not working class because you feel like you're working class. You're working class because your labor relationship is such that you have no power at work. I mean, people can test themselves. If you do not have much power at work, chances are you're working class, right? And that goes up to the middle class. The middle class has less and less power at work. I could tell you a story about university professors. I've been in this now for over 30 years. Um, Less and less power even in the universities. And so the class analysis here is a power analysis that has to be done in a way that people are not used to doing it. Uh, and it has to be done in a way that's not moralistic here. Because, if you start moralizing about it, you'll say, well, the ruling class, they're bad people. You start demonizing, CEOs or billionaires and so on. But that's not the point. I mean, in fact, class analysis can help demonize some of the people at the top. Because if you have a CEO who is doing the beating of the capitalist scene, and then that CEO decides, I'm not going to do that anymore, well, the reality is this person will be replaced. So it's not about individuals who are bad or especially greedy. It is about people playing their role in the system. Now, race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, ability, all of that plays its role. So, a lot of people are worried that when you do this class analysis, you're now pushing aside questions of race, gender, and so on. In fact, what you're doing, as I see it, you're now providing a platform in which questions of race, gender, and so on can be discussed more effectively because the capitalism is using these things to play out its own advantages. It's playing off people against each other based on their race, based on their gender. And when you see that, you can now use your analysis of power that comes via class in the capitalist scene in order to address, say, racism more successfully. And in order to address, then, of course, also problems like white supremacy. But here's the trick, the working class white supremacist now has to do a different analysis. Up to this point, people might have thought, well, the working class white supremacist, uh, it's their fault that the world is the way it is. Of course, they're not let off the hook now, but they're now beginning to realize we too are tricked. We too are duped. So repentance for the working class white supremacist now means uh, to sever the ties to the ruling class, to actually realize where their real self interests are, where their real solidarity is formed. And in the process, for people of faith, everything changes. Your images of God change, your relationship to Jesus change, your way of experiencing the Holy Spirit change, your way of reading the Bible changes. Very exciting stuff. But for all of these examples, you'll need some class analysis. And the truth is, even in the liberation theology camps, we're only just getting started. There's not the kind of class analysis happening just yet that will really help us to move forward.
Uh-huh. That makes sense. I mean, you mentioned it earlier about this interconnectedness. This whole gender, race, class. All it's really defeating to be actually look at them individually because all of them are interconnected, as you mentioned. But what I want to get at here is your theological framework. Gives us this very imaginative eschatology in light of the capital scene. So how do you want people to actually shift their perspective, to something that is more inspiring rather than something that is more apathy in their way of life as they tackle some of these challenges that confront them?
I mean, the first step for Christians here would be to ask some theological questions. The fundamental theological question that I often ask is, what is Jesus doing now? That may sound like a very simplistic question, but that presupposes a lot, right? It presupposes the resurrection. It presupposes that Jesus is actually, active, or there's something that we can connect with that's perhaps unexpected. Um, the typical question, what would Jesus do, usually assumes Jesus is sitting in heaven on a throne somehow next to God, waiting for the heavenly trumpet to come, right? Asking what is Jesus doing now is really reshaping a lot of what the Christian faith is assuming. A lot of people go to church because they think this is where they'll meet Jesus. Now, don't want to say that's not possible. Keep going and see what you find. But if Jesus is really Jesus, what's so exciting is that Jesus's ministry was outside of the sacred spaces, outside of the temple, outside of the synagogues. Not that he wasn't there either, but it really happened on the streets. And so for people to move out into life, not just because they want to help people, but because they really realize this is where we can find God. This is where we can connect with Jesus. This is where the Holy Spirit is moving us. That's a very different presupposition. So while the Capitalocene is trying, to control religion, control all of life, we're now pushing back against this control by saying, we cannot be controlled. Jesus cannot be controlled. God cannot be controlled. People of faith cannot be controlled. And that's a huge first step, right? And of course, then once you have sort of this spirit of resistance, um, you then have to think about how can we organize this? How can we actually build that relationship? And my argument here is, let's organize in relation to all of life. Let's organize not just in our leisure time, maybe on a Sunday morning or in a Wednesday night Bible study, but let's organize where we spend the bulk of our waking hours, and that happens at work, right? Most people spend more time at work than almost anywhere else. Maybe in bed, they spend as much time. But the reality here is, these are places of life that really matter for faith, that really matter for building alternatives. And if we start reclaiming that, I think we have a really good shot at making a difference. This is why the system is so worried about worker organizing. They're not worried about religious activism as much. Well, maybe in South Africa at one point they were. Right now, I don't think they are. Um, so as we reclaim those spaces, always with a spiritual focus. The focus here is not just how do we do better politics and economics, but how do we meet Jesus? How do we follow Jesus? Those are the foundational questions. And I think there's some real hope here that when that happens, things will be different.
Uh-huh. Dr. Rieger, we're running out of time. Perhaps as a parting question, if you were to leave our readers with something um, quite profound from theology in the capital scene, this one call to action that you would like our readers to actually do, particularly those who are in the US and those who are in South Africa, what would that look like?
So I oftentimes worry about simple moral principles, telling people you must do this, you must do that, because a lot of this leads to burnout. So a call to action to me is more profound if it realizes that there's a movement underfoot. There are things already happening in the world, and we can become part of it. So the first point here is, don't try to do it all by yourself. Don't try to overextend yourself. Don't think you can fix this. This is also realizing that privilege does not translate into power directly. A lot of privileged people have this fix it mentality and say, we must save the poor, we must be the voice for the voiceless. That may not be the correct way. A better way is to ask the question, again, what is Jesus doing now? And how's that happening in movement? So we're not just thinking about some individual who lived 2,000 years ago, but we're talking about how the Spirit is moving the communities now. The labor movement here is a good example. Now, not everybody can be part of the labor movement. In the US, they try to keep most people away and out of labor. But just realizing that there is some real energy building at work. That people have some power there. Realizing that work can be organized more collectively, more cooperatively than individualistically. Those are things where you're now using whatever you have. I mean, use basically the power that you have now and build on that, rather than thinking, this Wednesday night movement will now somehow bring about the revolution. I'm not that crazy about revolutions either. I think a lot of it happens by people doing the right thing, using the energy they have, using the spirit they have, and then organizing it together. So the point here is never try to go it alone, but work together. Find people, like-minded people, and sometimes there's small groups only where you are. But this is where social media, and podcasts and, interviews like this are really helpful, because we can now build international solidarity. I mean, the solidarity circles of the Wendland Cook program are really open to people around the world. So this is another possibility. I mean, build power in communities, use the God-given energy that's already there. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. And always make sure that you keep the eye on the prize. I mean, the eye on the prize here is, figure out what your faith here has to say, where God is at work. And some of this is really surprising and encouraging. So I want to conclude here with a notion of hope rather than despair, even though the situation is dire. I mean, especially in the United States right now. What we know is that no empire has ever existed forever. Rome is no more the Roman Empire. The British Empire is failing. The US Empire, well, we'll see. It's not going to be eternal. The Capitalocene, the same thing. This is not the kingdom of God. And therefore, we're working for the kingdom of God. We have the better deal. And these things will persist and continue.
Uh-huh. Dr. Rieger, it's certainly been great. And I certainly hope our audience have enjoyed this conversation. And I know it touches on a lot of things, and where a lot of people around the globe are essentially laborers in different industries, different fields. And we certainly hope that they are able to connect the dots and be able to organize and be able to talk together and unite in that diversity, to be able to fight this beast that is confronting us. We don't know whether we're going to conquer it now, but we certainly hope that we're making small differences as we're going along. And folks at home, thank you very much. Dr. Rieger, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
And thank you for your good questions, Cliff, and the work that you're doing. I mean, we could have talked more about your community. I know you're doing valuable work there, and that's the beauty. We're all connected in this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rieger.
You're
Folks
welcome.
at home, until next time, keep on tuning in and subscribing. As you can, you'll be able to get feeds as we upload all the content onto our site. Till next time, stay blessed and God bless. Bye.
Puluso Ministries is a non-profit educational enterprise founded in 2019. The ministry is informed by academic scholarship. At Puluso, we embrace multiple perspectives in our engagement with Scripture. We seek to provide non-Christians and Christians from all backgrounds and denominations with resources that provide an honest intellectual engagement with the Bible. We embrace multiple perspectives in fostering a more open, moderate society into the 21st century and beyond.